Story 1. The Leviathan's Grin. Sean woke up in his modest bedroom to the sound of his wife Doris cooking breakfast, just as she did every morning. Wiping the sleep from his aged eyes, Sean sat upright in his bed for a few minutes before finally getting dressed. After suiting up, he looked through his cabinet in an attempt to find his favorite cap, but to no avail. He shrugged to no one and deduced that he had probably left it on the dining room table after supper the night before. Sean looked into his beside mirror, as he did often out of habit, and noticed his age. He was getting too old and sickly to continue living the life of physical labor he did, but such rationalizations would have to be left alone. Despite his graying hair and wrinkling face, money was still necessary for survival. Sean immediately laughed to himself out loud at such an implication and mumbled that nothing will ever change that. It was at this particular point in time that Sean looked out the lone window over his bedpost to peer at the weather conditions at sea. A storm was coming, but he would set sail regardless of that fact. He had been doing it for 30 years, after all. Suddenly, Sean clutched his forehead in pain. "These fucking headaches have been plaguing me for too long," Sean said as he gritted his teeth. Propping himself against the wall, he waited several minutes for his mind to settle before rising and attempting to head downstairs to the kitchen. Even though he had been suffering from these headaches for months now, Sean refused to tell his wife about them. He didn't want her to worry about him, seeing as though she was already stricken with grief on a daily basis due to Sean's dangerous line of work. Sean also came from a sickly family, and he never wanted to remind Doris of that fact, so he decided to keep all of his ailments to himself. Just as he was prepared to descend the steps, his wife called him with a noticeable tone of stress. "Come on, honey, your food is going to get cold." Sean walked up to his wife and kissed her before sitting at the table and admiring her. Doris had a homely look about her that reflected the coziness of the house. She was a few years younger than Sean at the age of 42. Although the two had wanted children, Doris was a bad carrier. She had lost every child conceived, unable to carry any of them to term. To many other women, this would be irrevocably devastating, but Sean helped her through the grieving, and they soon discovered that their love was strong enough to overpower her depression. Doris had fading blonde hair and a slim figure. She dressed casually, only leaving the house for groceries. She had offered to work many years ago, but Sean refused to let her, saying that he would provide for the both of them. Doris contested for an entire decade before realizing that Sean would not budge. He was simply much too stubborn and proud. Sean very much believed in the concept that the woman should take care of the household and homely affairs. He enjoyed coming home to a loving wife who was not stressed and who an excellently prepared dinner that was not rushed more than he would ever enjoy. The extra income she would bring in. As it turned out, Doris loved taking care of the house and preparing the food. She knew she was good at it and appreciated the simple lifestyle. The two were happy together and never fought over trivial things. They knew they were far better with each other than they could ever be apart, and so when the seas of their relationship became tumultuous, they would solve the problem civilly. Sean closed his eyes and meditated on the day ahead of him for a few seconds before smelling the hot plate of food being gently placed beneath his nose. Every meal from Doris was better than the last, a feat Sean had never been able to comprehend. He ate it slowly and appreciated every bite, smiling at how expertly it was prepared. Oftentimes, Doris would stand behind the kitchen counter and watch Sean enjoy his food for a while before joining him at the table herself. Sean never noticed, of course, because he was too busy eating. This particular morning, however, she sat beside him immediately with a concerned look on her face. "Sean, I am worried about your health. It seems like every morning it takes you longer to come down for breakfast. Is something wrong? Are you having trouble getting out of bed? Are your joints ailing you? Is there anything I can do?" The barrage of questions was too much for Sean to handle, and he was too shocked to answer promptly. He stared at her blankly for a moment before regaining composure and saying that there is nothing wrong with me, Doris. You over-worrying about everything. Love, I think with age, you must be imagining things. Sean lied, but masked it with lightheartedness, knowing that it would be the most effective way to dissipate Doris's worries. Sean was never proud of lying, but he knew that telling her the truth would only cause her to be more concerned. There was simply no reason to do such a thing, Sean thought to himself. Even if there was, in fact, something serious ailing him, he simply did not have the monetary resources to get it checked out thoroughly. Because of this, Sean discerned that the only reasonable solution to the matter would be silence. What Doris didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Doris shook her head in disbelief, but felt that pressing the subject further would only annoy Sean. She took a moment to ponder and then began to second-guess herself. Maybe there really isn't anything wrong and I am just worrying over nothing, Doris thought. There was no way to be sure, she realized, but pestering Sean about something that he didn't want to tell her would not solve anything. She decided, rather, that the best course of action would be to change the subject. "How are the conditions at sea looking today?" Doris partly asked because she couldn't think of anything else to say, but mostly because bad weather could mean making Sean's already dangerous job all the more life-threatening. The worries always consumed her. She simply couldn't help but ask. Sean responded honestly, but only because he knew that Doris would inevitably look out the window to see if he was lying later in the day. Otherwise, he would have spared her the stress. "I hate your job, Sean. Every day you leave me, and I am always unsure if you will return home. Do you realize what that kind of stress can do to a woman?" Sean smiled, knowing that Doris only worried because she cared. He kissed her once more, picked up his favorite sea cap, and reassured her that he would return home that day just as he always had. "It will take more than a few oversized waves and some drizzle to bury me at sea, darling." Sean, without saying another word, briskly walked out of his front door and descended the hill on which his abode stood. He was already slightly late for work, but since he was captain of the ship, there was not much anyone could say about it. "It's good being the boss," Sean said before chuckling to himself. As Sean walked into the harbor, he looked back at his home once more and professed out loud how grateful he was for his life. He did this every day before setting sail, to make sure that he had no regrets. Should the worst of the worst occur, Sean made sure that could lay at peace. Sean had also heard once in a shady pub during his youth that it's bad luck to have a voyage at sea with an ill temper, and because of this statement he always boarded his vessel, the final offer, with a grin on his face. He greeted his deckhands and apologized for being late, knowing that he would inevitably hear the same. "You are getting too old for this. jokes as he had heard countless times before. Sean laughed, knowing that the young sailors were right, but he also knew damn well that he would never admit that fact to anyone but himself. Sean ordered the lower-ranking members of the crew to take care of the grunt work before anchoring away, while he took account for the weather and how it would affect the day's fishing. The sky ahead looked grim, but nothing the old sailor hadn't faced before. With determination, he exclaimed to the crew that he felt luck on the horizon. Sean had always believed that the best fishing occurred when the ocean was in a rage. It assured that the best catch would only go to the most experienced hands. The crew set sail, and the day's fishing would commence just as it always would, with sea salt and grit. Sean approved of his men, knowing that each and every one of them had been hardened by the sea. He puffed a few plumes of smoke from his pipe and observed the deckhands for mistakes from the captain's quarters. The crew's aqua uniform blended in almost perfectly with the swirls of blue and green produced from the waves crashing against the boat. Sean saw that the weather was as cold and sharp as murder, but the deckhands were stoic in their work. He had much pride in seeing that the tenacity of the sea salt mist was equaled only by the sweat of the crew's brow, who labored tireless for hours. Sean wanted to feel the adventure, so he descended from his quarters to join the crew. Even though Sean didn't have to be on deck, he sometimes did it out of principle to show the other men that he was not just an empty crown. During these periods, Sean would send his most experienced deckhand, a young lad by the name of Colin, to the helm for steering. Colin would eventually succeed Sean as captain of the ship. He was also the deckhand that had been on the final offer with Sean the longest. Because of this, Sean saw him as the only appropriate choice for future captain. To pick anyone else would be a considerable disrespect. Even though Sean trusted Colin the most, being the first mate was no easy task. Sean had made Colin work for the position rigorously in his younger years, and would occasionally give Colin the most strenuous tasks of the day in order to see if his skills were still honed. Nevertheless, on this particular day, Sean decided to give Colin a break. "Why don't you take the steering wheel for a while, Colin? This old sailor wants to test his sea legs on this fine day." Colin smirked warmly and set off for the helm without questioning his captain. Sean worked on deck for a few hours, noticing that the weather was getting worse. The waves became more ferocious, and the rain had an acute sting of sorrow to it. The clouds were as black as night, and the only light in the sky was produced from thunder arcing across the entire horizon. The wind shear chilled Sean to the bone, a stigma that he had not felt for many years. Sean began to question his decision to set sail on this day, but quickly ignored his worries. It would be no use turning back now. By the time they reached the harbor, the storm would be over. Besides, Sean thought, they were pulling in a tremendous amount of fish. He looked back towards Colin in the captain's seat to make sure that he had the wheel under control before suddenly clenching his forehead in agony. Sean looked down and bent his knees to stabilize himself under the tremendous amount of pain he was experiencing. He had dealt with the headaches before, but they had only ailed him in the morning. When he woke up, it was much easier to cope with the migraines in the comfort of his own home. Out at sea, it was a different story altogether. Sean looked at the wood of the deck to discover something strikingly uncanny. Sean was seeing through a monochrome lens. He closed his eyes tightly to shake off what he was sure was only an illusion. but when he opened them he perceived only a black and white existence. Sean fell to the deck and saw that his crew lay brutally murdered and strewn across it. Their blood painted the deck black, and many of their organs were plastered on the mast. Sean turned his head sharply to the helm to see if Colin had befallen the same fate. What he saw caused him to vomit profusely. The glass window to the captain's quarters was shattered, and the upper half of Colin was hanging out the broken orifice. Colin's upper torso was connected to his lower only by his elongated spine and intestines. Meanwhile, his wounds still were spewing blood erratically. Sean could see that Colin's head had been forced completely backwards from its natural position. Colin's lacerated and lifeless face peered directly at Sean from a distance, but the most terrifying quality it possessed was an eerie smile that went from ear to ear. Disgusted, Sean looked to the sky and began to see millions of black droplets falling from it. He made no mistake in perceiving the droplets as having the same shade of black that was shooting out of his deceased deckhands. The blood rain covered the final offer in its endless opaqueness, which inevitably caused Sean to scream in horror, only to find that his voice produced no audible sound. He looked to the sky once more, cringing in terror at the myriad of lightning strikes that were as silent as death's embrace. The only thing that Sean could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding against his chest, an occurrence that began to increase in rate with every second. Soon, his heartbeat reached inhuman levels of force and pace before sharply changing into an agonizingly slow rumble. Looking out at sea, Sean saw a single entity, a colossal leviathan staring directly back at him, grinning. Sean made sure to note of the leviathan's every detail, on the hopes that he would pass his tale upon surviving. Yet, for obvious reasons, he failed to see in the plausibility of such a scenario. Nevertheless, it only took Sean a matter of moments to realize that he could never forget the abhorring sight before him even if he wanted to. The creature had thick white scales that covered its entire body in a serpentine pattern. The scales, worn and covered in barnacles, were a clear indicator of the beast's ancient age. Sean followed the scales from the Titan's base in the water, all the way skyward to its eyes, which were large feline masses of gray tissue. Sean attempted to count the seconds that it took for the creature to blink, but his heart soon deadened at the realization that the eyes remained open for as long as he peered into them. It was then that Sean observed the monster's enormous size, which easily tower over the final offer's mast threefold. If the beast wanted to, Sean thought, it could thrash its reptilian body in the waves and cause the ship to capsize with ease. The Leviathan housed a gigantic mouth which had 3 rows of teeth that grew in size as they radiated forward. The teeth were jagged and curved inwards, but did not seem terribly sharp, an observation that was impossible to feel positive or negative about. Sean could see that they were stained with black blood and strewn with bones, articles of clothing, and a vast amount of flesh. Here, Sean began to notice the Leviathan's face, a flat, almost human-like visage that didn't seem to fit the rest of its body. Adding to the sinister vibe of the creature was its statuesque stance. The waves nor the wind could shake the beast from its posture. Equally ominous was the wretch's grin. Sean could not understand what the creature could possibly be contented with until he realized that the ship was heading straight for it. Sean didn't notice it at first, but the demon's grin was slowly widening as the boat drew closer. Sean counted the seconds as they passed. praying that his demise would be quick and painless. Hopefully, he thought, the boat would simply crash into the statuesque creature, casting it away, or at the very least knocking him out unconscious. The boat started to move towards the Leviathan with increased speed, eventually reaching momentum that would be impossible under any normal circumstance. Shawn realized that the impact would shatter the boat, so he closed his eyes awaiting death. To his surprise, however, the vessel stopped abruptly for no apparent reason. The sharp stop caused Shawn to fall forwards and hit something directly in front of him. Not understanding what could have possibly happened, Shawn opened his eyes to find that the ship had stopped directly in front of the Leviathan, who had now lowered its face to meet his. Shawn silently screamed as the beast's nostrils blasted hot, moist air onto his face. The force of the monster's breath knocked Shawn's cap straight off of his head. The sea devil then opened its mouth, showcasing the rows of dagger-like teeth it possessed as a final act of torture before swallowing Shawn whole. Shawn suddenly awoke to find himself in the medical room of his ship. He was being taken care of by Colin, who had a very stern look on his face. Shawn tried to speak, but at this time he was too physically worn to mouth anything. "About 3 hours ago, you fell unconscious out on the deck. You had us scared for your life, Shawn. You should have told us something was wrong, and you never should have volunteered to work on the deck if you had the slightest inclination of being sick. Did you go out there because you have some sort of death wish?" Colin was infuriated, a fact that made Shawn feel appreciated as a captain. Shawn responded to Colin with a gesture of composure, to which Colin agreed to. Shawn whispered into Colin's ear slowly and deliberately, "I'm fine. Don't worry about me." Colin sighed in disbelief and frustration. How someone could be so reckless was a question he would surely never have answered. Despite his concern, however, Colin knew that the old captain would never admit to having done anything wrong. Colin made sure that Shawn was comfortable and then left to steer. He had left the second mate in charge while he stabilized Shawn. Shawn rested for 10 minutes and then got up. Being much proud to not command his own ship, he assured Colin that everything was fine and then proceeded to steer for the remainder of the day's journey. When the final offer finally reached land, Shawn couldn't have been more elated. Even though he had surmised the encounter with the Leviathan as merely a nightmare, he still was contented greatly at the notion that he was safe. After post-voyage work was completed, Shawn hurried home to his wife. He rushed through the door and immediately embraced her, telling her that he loved her and that he was so lucky to have her. At first, he was afraid that too passionate of a greeting would leave Doris suspicious. However, he was joyous to find that Doris had not suspected anything from the encounter. Shawn then took some time to look around his comfortable living space and affirmed with himself that he was truly ecstatic to be alive. He sat down to yet another perfect meal and talked semantics with Doris for the remainder of the night in the hopes that he would forget the hellish experience he had while unconscious. Even still, in his own mind, he dreaded the following day's work, but he also thought that a good night's sleep would work wonders on his mental status. After showering and doing his average evening routine, Shawn retired to bed, where he laid with Doris, embracing her. It took him longer than usual, but he eventually fell into a deep sleep, one that was luckily not infested with nightmares. Shawn awoke to the same sounds of Doris cooking in the kitchen below. He put on his clothes with a vigor that he had not felt in many years and peered into his bedside mirror to find himself looking especially sharp. "Today is going to be a great day," Sean said to himself with confidence. He looked out of the window and into the sea to find a crystal-clear day. "Much better than yesterday, that's for sure," Sean mumbled. He began to descend the stairs, but then remembered that he needed his cap. He walked to his cabinet and opened it with excessive force to find that the cap was nowhere to be found. It was then that Sean realized something unnerving. When he had awoken in the medical room inside the final offer, he did not have his cap. "Surely I must have just lost it at sea when I fell unconscious from the migraine," Sean whispered to himself nervously before falling to the ground in anguish. Another headache was pounding through his skull with such exertion that Sean could barely breathe. His vision faded to gray once more, and soon the only thing he could hear was the sound of his own heart. He regained composure just as he saw a flash of light coming from the window above his bed. Sean couldn't believe what was happening, but he had to look out of the window for the sake of his own sanity. It was raining more furiously than the day before and with thunder that was much more alarming. However, Sean was much more concerned with the Leviathan staring and grinning at him in the distance. Doris heard a crash from the bedroom upstairs and instantly knew something had gone wrong. She left the breakfast unattended as she rushed up the steps and through the door of the bedroom to find Sean unconscious, collapsed on the floor next to the cabinet. Although she was frantic with worrying, she knew that she had to get Sean medical attention. An emergency response team was at the house in a matter of minutes, but nothing could have been done. Sean was dead before they had even arrived, dead from a massive brain aneurysm, the team reiterated to Doris, but she wouldn't believe them. In shock, all Doris could say was, "But he told me nothing was wrong," over and over again. Doris blamed herself for Sean's death, telling herself that if she had just been a better wife that she could have gotten Sean the help he needed. It was only a matter of weeks before the neighbors found her hung in the bedroom, right over the spot where Sean had died. She simply could not cope with the reality that she was alone. The neighbors had also found a suicide note written by Doris, which only consisted of the same sentence covering the entire page: "Nothing is wrong." When Colin heard of the news that Sean had died, he went up to the house the very next day. Doris greeted him saying that, "You're going to make a fine captain, Colin. It is what Sean would have wanted." Colin quickly paid his respects and left, a single tear rolling down his cheek and onto the ground, which was soaked from the rain, as he walked down the hill back into town. He looked out to sea as a final gesture of gratitude for what Sean had taught him, but soon became mortified at the sight before him, a monster which had haunted his dreams almost every single night since he became first mate. On the final offer was in the shallows only 50 feet from where he stood. The Leviathan was blankly staring at him, just as it had done in his dreams so dishearteningly. Squinting his eyes, Colin could make out Sean's favorite sailing cap wedge between two of its teeth. It was grinning wider than ever, always grinning. Story 2. Blue Nightmare. Police and ambulances surrounded a house where a family of 5 had been murdered last night. This wasn't the first murder that has happened in the area. In fact, it was one of many others. Police couldn't explain who was doing the murders and why they were even happening. What was the murderer's motive for killing all these innocent people? EMTs were pulling someone out on a stretcher who was at the brink of death. It was a male in his late 40s, and one of the cops walked over to him because he was trying to say something. All he managed to utter out was "blue nightmare." After that he coughed up blood and took his final breath and died. The news got out about this blue nightmare. Who was this person, and what was their motive? Please, if you hear or see anything, call the police. Zoe Carlin was only 6 years old, living in a small town that no one really hears or passes by in California. In the house it was just her mother, and her older brother Kevin. Her father had left them when she was only 4. She started off happy growing up for the first few years of her life. Then, when she turned 6, her older brother started pestering her, telling her scary stories. She started waking up with nightmares from the stories she was told. Her mother would come in and try to comfort her, but all she said was, "Kevin is just being a pest trying to scare you. Don't let it get to you." Then she would leave. Zoe woke up the next morning, and as she was walking, Kevin jumped out from behind a corner and yelled, then started laughing. "Ha ha ha, Zoe, you're such a baby. You're so easy to scare." He turned and walked off laughing. She walked downstairs for breakfast. As she entered the kitchen, Kevin acted as if he was going to throw his fork at her, and Zoe screamed. Then he started laughing and said, "Ha, I'm always going to be your worst nightmare, little sister. You'll never escape me." Ms. Carlin hit him over the head and said, "Kevin, that is enough torturing your sister. Now sit down and eat so you can get to school." He grumbled, then started eating his eggs. Zoe climbed up on her chair and started eating, and their mom drove them to school. Today was Zoe's 14th birthday, and she has been having a hard time in school lately. She tried telling those she attempted to make friends with about her brother and how he would scare her, and she would end up with nightmares, and they laughed, and some have even said, "Zoe, aren't you too old to believe in all that stuff and get nightmares? Oh my gosh, it's so funny. You're such a big baby." They went on laughing until she went home. She only had one friend, Mandy, and they have been friends since they were both 10. At home, Zoe sat in her room alone and away from anyone. Lately, she had been feeling a tad strange, like she wasn't herself at times, but she brushed it off and ignored it. Her mom walked in and started talking. "Come downstairs, sweetie. Mandy came over for your birthday, and today Kevin promised to behave and not scare you on your 14th birthday." Her mother held her hand out, and Zoe took it and was led downstairs for her small party. It was just her mother, Kevin, and Mandy, but she didn't mind. She was happy with it, and her brother sort of behaved. He scared her with a fake snake down her back. That night she scared herself awake from another nightmare. She sat up, breathing heavy and in a cold sweat. Her nightmares have been becoming more frightening. At times she kept seeing a girl, but she couldn't make out her face yet, but she could feel something scary coming from her. She didn't understand it right now, but she hoping to figure out what it meant. The next day, as her and Mandy were walking home, a strange man pulled Mandy into a dark alleyway and tried tearing off her clothes. When Mandy started to kick and struggle, the man hit her head against the brick wall several times to where her skull cracked open, ending up killing her. The stranger dropped Mandy's corpse and started walking over to Zoe, sneering, "Get over here, little girl. Your friend didn't give me what I want. You will take her place." Zoe's left eye started twitching and her hands shook. Her eyes looked over to her right, and she saw a large broken shard of glass. Her left eye started to change. It changed from a vibrant green to a piercing icy blue. From that point on it was like a switch flipped in her, and the once cheery, bright, happy, and caring Zoe seemed to be gone, and she was replaced with a mechanical, twisted, and insane version of herself. Zoe grinned and looked at the man and walked towards him, kicking at the glass shard. She acted as if she stumbled and fell to the ground. She kept grinning and curled her fingers around the shard and held it close to her side as she stood up. Zoe looked at the man, then started letting out a creepy giggle. She jump hit the man and held the shard above her head, slamming her head against his chest hard enough to knock the wind out of him. He stumbled back and started coughing, and that's when Zoe took her chance and slammed the shard into his gut. She laughed and started stabbing him over and over again. The man tried to push her back as he was also trying to cover himself from being stabbed. His arm ended up with cuts in it as she brutally murdered him. Before he died, he scratched over her left eye so blood got in it, and she had to close it. Once her now blue eye was closed, her personality died 180, and she returned to her old self. Zoe saw the man beneath her, and covered in blood and stab wounds. She freaked out. She could tell he was dead, and she had his blood on her. For a second she didn't know how this happened. Then she saw the bloody shard in her hand. Zoe looked over at her friend, then looked at a broken mirror leaning against the alley wall, and blood from the scratch was running over her eye and down her face. She screamed, and someone came running. Oh my gosh, what happened here? Girl, what did you do? Zoe looked back and shook eye. I don't know what happened. 1M. Moment this man was T. Trying to force himself on my friend, and then he killed her. After TH. That he was coming at me, and TH. That's all I remember. I must have done TH. This trying to fend him off. I just want to go home and for this to all be over. Zoe had to remain there what emergency services came and took care of things. Emps put bandages around her left eye after cleaning the cut. She looked at a mirror and frowned. She almost looked like she was missing an eye. A cop drove her home, and when her mother saw her, she started freaking. Oh, geez, Zoe, what the hell happened? Why are you covered in blood? The cop spoke up. Calm down, ma'am. Your daughter here killed someone who killed her friend Mandy, and then tried to force himself onto her. Ms. Carlin ran over and hugged Zoe. Come on, dear, let's throw those clothes out and get you cleaned up. Her mother took her inside, and when her brother saw her, he stepped back. Gosh, you look like a mess, Zoe. What did you do? Dive into a pool of cherry filling. He snorted at his own joke, and their mother snapped at him. Kevin, that is enough. Mandy was just killed, and your sister was almost taken advantage of by some stranger. She killed him in self-defense. Kevin gulped loudly at the thought that his little scaredy cat sister could actually kill someone, let alone someone who was twice her size. At night while she was sleeping, she had the same nightmare again of that girl she kept seeing. Only this time she could see her face. It looked just like her, only it wasn't her. This girl had her hair covering her right eye, and her left eye was a piercing icy blue. The girl grinned at Zoe and spoke. Well, we finally get to meet Zoe. I've been waiting so long to meet you. Zoe tilted her head and looked a little scared. Who are you, and how do you know my name? The girl laughed and walked towards her. Why, Zoe, I am you. Only I'm the darkest parts of you, the part you push away, and the part who wants to make others suffer. Those who scare you and laugh at you for being scared, as well those who don't do anything about the ones hurting you. I'm the you that will help, that will make it all go away. Zoe started shaking her head and holding her hands against the side of her head. No, 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 no. You're not me. I don't want to hurt anyone. I'm not a murderer. The girl who claimed to be her walked up to Zoe and placed her hands on her shoulders. Zoe, accept this. Open your mind. Shall I show you what we did today? What happened when you, shall I say, blacked out? Zoe looked at her, then looked around as images swirled around. What happened? The very gap in her memory. Zoe gulped and watched as the images played. She saw every last broody thing that happened, and seeing herself laughing and smiling as she murdered the man in such a brutal and bloody way that for a moment she couldn't even believe it was her. But how? I don't remember any of this at all. The girl chuckled. Oh, that's because I emerged. You're sat in the back of our mind and just freak out about Mandy. Take off those bandages and take a look at your left eye. Zoe turned and a random mirror popped up. So she pulled the bandages from her left eye, looked at it. She saw it was the same shade of blue at the girl's, who stood next to her and pushed her hair away from her right eye, and it was the same green and Zoe's. See, I told you, I am you. We are one, Zoe, and just think of what we can do to those who hurt us. Zoe pushed the girl back and started screaming. She only woke up 'cause her mother was shaking her. Zoe sat up and panted, then hugged her mother. It's all right, Zoe. Was just another nightmare. Everything is okay. You just went through a lot today. Her mother left the room, leaving Zoe alone with her thoughts. A voice in her mind that sounded like the girl, who also sounded the same as her. Just so you know, if our blue eye shows, you go into our mind and I am free to have fun. Once I have had my fun, I will cover our blue eye, and you come back out and I go in. Zoe shook her head and tried to ignore the voice. The next day, when Zoe went to school, everyone who laughed at her for always being scared kept coming around her and telling her how sorry they were for her lose, 'cause they knew Mandy was her best friend. They all said things like, oh, she was such a good person, and we will miss her so much. Zoe grumbled to herself, and her inner self spoke up. Oh, geez, they are all such fakes. They didn't know her like we did. They should just all go away. Zoe was starting to agree with her inner self about it. She hated how they were being fake to her just because her only friend was killed. She hated her brother for torturing her most of her life, scaring her and causing her nightmares, and she was hating her mother for doing nothing about it, never stopping it, and only yelling at him for it. As she walked home, she seemed to talk to Zoe as she started calling her inner self. Zoe seemed happy about it, being able to talk to Zoe and have her agree with her way of thinking. As days went by, Zoe and Zoe's minds start to really think alike. But the only thing was Zoe couldn't do the things Zoe could. Zoe couldn't kill anyone, but Zoe could. Zoe started becoming more isolated to herself, thinking about all those who hurt her, who laughed at her, who scared her, and who didn't help her when she really needed it. The following week, her and Zoe agreed that all of them had to go away. So during the weekend, she went through her father's things in the attic that her mother never got rid of and found an old sword that her father had collected. She pulled it from the sheath and saw it was in perfect condition still, and it was still perfectly sharp. She dug some more and found a serrated hunting knife, and her and Zoe knew that it would rip and tear through a person's flesh. She walked downstairs Everyone was sleeping. Kevin passed out on the couch with video games still going, and her mother was asleep in her room. Zoe pulled off the eye patch she wore 'cause she told everyone she couldn't see out of that eye 'cause of the scratch. But that was a lie. Once the eye patch was removed, Zoe went in, and Zoe emerged, then grinned. She walked into her mother's room and seen that she had kicked her blankets off. Zoe walked over and held the knife above her head and slammed it down into her mother's gut. Her mother woke up and screamed in pain from it, asking her what she is doing. Zoe grinning, "Oh, mother, this is your fault. You should have stopped Kevin from scaring me and giving me those nightmares." "Well, mother, it's time for you to go into a permanent nightmare." Zoe tore the knife through her mother's abdomen, watching the blood pour from her body and laughing at that and her mother's antagonizing screams. Zoe stabbed her mother in a different spot, and blood sprayed from her body. "Look at all the blood spraying from your body, mother. It's beautiful." Zoe cackled and stabbed her mother again and tore through her flesh, ripping her skin open. Her mother started coughing as blood started to come up through her throat, and she started to choke on her own blood. Zoe stood back, marveling at her work, watching her mother die slowly and painfully. "Oh, mother, we wouldn't be going through this if only you had helped me." Her mother looked at her and tried to reach out to her. Zoe watched as the life faded from her eyes, then she turned and heading down to the living room. Kevin had woken up hearing the scream and only thinking it was Zoe having a nightmare again, and he chucked to himself. He was sitting there playing video games again, not paying attention to anything. Zoe walked up behind him and pulled the sword from its sheath. She walked around so that she was standing next to her idiot brother and giggled. "Hello, Kevin. What are you doing?" He didn't look up and said, "Playing my video games." "Did you have another nightmare, Scaredy Cat?" He chuckled and paused his game to look at her and jumped up, dropping his controller. He saw blood spattered on her clothes and dripping from her face. Kevin started to back up and stammered, Zoe, what did you do?" "Oh, just had a small conversation with Mother, and the same one I am going to have with you." Zoe cackled and swung her sword. Kevin put his arms up to only be cut badly. He let out a scream which only made Zoe laugh and grin more. She stepped closer and slashed at him again. Him not being able to cover himself now cause of his arms ended up with a large gash across his chest. He tried to turn and run away, and Zoe slashed her sword across his back, but didn't get as deep this time. He yelped in agony and started to run up the stairs. Zoe took her knife and threw it at Kevin, ending up hitting him in the back of his left leg, to which he fell down and tried dragging himself up the stairs. Zoe giggled and made her way to her brother and tilted her head and smiling manically. He shook and tried kicking at her with his good leg, but she cut it. "If only you hadn't scared me so much and gave me nightmares, then we wouldn't go through all this. You gave me nightmares, so it's time to send you into a permanent nightmare." With that word, Zoe slashed her sword across it as he threw, cutting into it and watching his blood spray out from it. She giggled as he laid there gurgling on his blood and taking his last breath. Zoe laughed as the only noise in the house was her. She walked out of the house and walked to the house of one of the girls who laughed and teased her, her reddish-brown hair blowing back in the wind and her porcelain cream-colored skin splattered with deep red blood. Her green eye and blue eye had a crazy look, and little giggles escaped from her lips. When she got to the house, she saw that all 5 of the girls were there. Looks like they had a sleepover. Zoe had hit the jackpot, being able to wipe out all those girls at once. She thought to end them quickly, but at the same time make them suffer. So as they slept, she went around the house and sealed off any way out except for one door, which she would be standing near in case anyone would come out, and if they did, she would kill them. She snuck in and messed with an electrical socket, cut a few wires and connected it to something very flammable. She watched as it started to spark from the wires, then slowly catch fire. She also took the batteries out of most of the smoke detectors and left only one working, the one in an upstairs hallways. She walked out to the back door, which she had left open and unsealed, and waited. After about 10 minutes, the one smoke detector started going off loudly, and she could see the fire has spread quickly. It helped she had laid a bunch of dish towels covered in vodka to help spread the fire. So heard the girls starting to scream and could hear them yelling that many places wouldn't open. Zoe, deep in her own mind, could tell what was going on. It's almost as if she could see it and hear it, like she was there and the one doing it. She had a big smile on her face and was swaying a bit and giggling. Zoe heard running of someone coming towards the door she was standing at. She pulled out her sword that still had Kevin's blood on it and held it tight in her hands with a wicked grin on her face. One girl, the more timid but still rude one, ran out, and Zoe swung her sword, and the girl's head flew off, and her body fell to the ground. Zoe listened, and hearing them coughing and still trying to escape, she knew one of them had serious asthma, and heard her coughing the most, and the other girls telling her to hang on, that they were going to find a way out. Zoe waited, talking with Zoe, and watched the house go up in flames. Getting bored waiting for them, she tossed the girl's head, then her body into the house and closed, then sealed off the door and walked off into the shadows, grinning and saying they are going into a permanent nightmare. She ended up leaving the small town and wandering around, killing off others. Zoe heard the news of the murders that followed her and snicker as they said the hunt for Zoe Carlin was still going. Zoe sat in a house of her newly murdered victims, cleaning up herself and getting new clothes and something to eat. She heard one of the people in the house that she thought was dead. It was the 17-year-old girl, so she pulled off her eye patch. Then Zoe walked over to the girl and stood over her. Zoe grinned and leaned closer to her, only her blue eyes showing, and Zoe said to her, "Time to send you into a permanent nightmare." After that, she stabbed her sword into the girl's heart and watched her die. Laughing, Zoe walked out of the house, putting the eye patch back over her blue eye, and Zoe was back out again. She wandered around for a while without hitting any houses, but sneaking in them to eat so she could stay alive. Little did she know she was being watched by the people. They had been watching her for a week now, and were about ready to approach her. Later that night, Zoe were bored, so Zoe let Zoe out. Zoe walked up to a small house that only had a couple in it. She broke in and brutally murdered them, their blood all over their bed and room. She walked out and was approached by a boy with black hair, wearing a blood-stained hoodie. She looked at his face and saw a smile carved into it, and he was staring at her. She could make out in the shadows a very tall man, one who was as tall as the trees. The boy spoke to her, "Hello there, Zoe, or am I talking to Zoe?" He chuckled, and Zoe held her knife up to his neck. "Who the hell are you, and how do you know us? Are you going to be our next victim?" The boy put his own knife to her throat and said, "Don't test me or I will make you go to sleep." Zoe didn't like how she was being treated, so she pushed the boy back and pulled out her sword. She started swinging it at him, and he started walking backwards, avoiding her blade. He walked back to the trees until he was close to the tall man. The man didn't move, but something wrapped around her waist and lifted her into the air. Zoe struggled, and the man spoke. "Keep still, and I will explain everything. The boy down by my side is Jeffrey Woods, or as he is known by his victims, Jeff the Killer. I am the Slenderman, and we have been watching you for some time now, and I can offer you protection. At the same time, you can still do what you like and have this fun. All you have to do is accept my offer." Zoe crossed her arms and was still for a while. She was talking with Zoe, and they were discussing his offer. Zoe looked at Slender and let out a breath. "We have discussed it, and we accept. We don't want to be caught and placed in a mental hospital and locked away forever in it." Slenderman put Zoe down, and she put her eye patch back on, letting Zoe come back out. She gave a smile and held her hand out. "Hello, I'm Zoe Carlin, and I am very happy to be joining you and your special family, Mr. Slenderman, sir." She followed them into the woods, and they seemed to disappear. The search for Zoe ended when they found her bloody clothes in the woods. She was presumed dead, but murdered still happened. So if you open your eyes one night and see a single icy blue eye, don't even try to scream or try to fight her off, because no matter what you do, the blue nightmare will always send you into a permanent nightmare. Story 3. Chronicles of the Mark Number 1, The Crazy Place. This is an entry in the ongoing Mark of Canis Basta series. Two concepts exist in our world, the natural and the supernatural. Humanity actively sees and understands the natural as we progress in science and mathematics, but most of us refuse to observe the existence of the supernatural, as we usually cannot perceive it. Many outright deny the possibility of supernatural occurrences, artifacts, or entities entirely, on the grounds that these things cannot be logically explained. The supernatural cannot be explained logically because it is not based in logic, as logic itself is a natural principle. The human mind, or at least the part our basic consciousness resides in, is another natural thing, an article of logic. This is why we are not able to accept the supernatural as real, because it goes against the very basis of our understanding. Many argue the supernatural is in a part of our minds, the usually dormant part from where psychosis comes from, the crazy part, and that our minds have the capability for the supernatural, but that portion is almost always locked for some reason. Either way, the supernatural most certainly exists, and there is a lot of power in it even today. One such case of supernatural power in the world is the Mark of Canis, a manifestation of evil in the universe, and a driving force for violent insanity and even deeper darkness in the confines of the mind. Throughout time, the Mark of Canis has touched certain individuals to the point of total, unfiltered madness. Francis Bandersnatch, an English archaeologist of the early 20th century, recounts his encounter with the Mark as it drove his compatriot off the edge of the human psyche and sent him spiraling into the dark depths of lunacy. The year was 1912, and I, Francis Bandersnatch, had only just earned the position of head archaeologist of a dig team at Oxford. A fetching 27 years of age, I was in the prime of my life and ready for any kind of adventure, for so I had thought. When my first assignment came in, I was eager to test my wits and determined to make my country proud through discovery. However, I was not prepared, contrary to my attitude, for the horrors to come. Apparently, some American chap by the name of Edward Cripp had been exploring in the Yucatan, a jungle peninsula in Mexico, when he stumbled upon some odd ruins from a seemingly ancient civilization. He then proceeded to enter the main structure, as any self-respecting explorer would have done, and scope out the place. He found things quite interesting, obviously interesting enough to contract a dig team from Oxford, with yours truly as head, to excavate 2 ruins and uncover the secrets within. I must admit, it sounded marvelous, a great first assignment for my team, and I accepted without hesitation. In 2 weeks' time, my team arrived in a small village outlying the jungle and met up with this American fellow. At first sight, he seemed like an eager man, full of energy and passion. We only exchanged a brief greeting, but I liked him immediately. The locals at the village, however, did not. Strange lot, these Mexicans. They completely avoided Cripp and refused to speak with him. The night before we set out for the ruins, as my team and Cripp all retired to get some sleep, one of them came to me. He looked grave, almost frightened, said he had come to warn me. You and team go to ruins. Stay away, I warn you. Evil-crotched and old temple. Aztecs from here, they build great temples all over. This one different. No Aztecs, someone else. They deny Aztec gods, worship true evil. They gone, but evil remain. I listened intently to the man's story. It was foreboding, I must admit, and I was a little spooked, but nevertheless I had an assignment. I was hungry for adventure. I realized now I should have heeded his warning, and left right then that night. But I didn't listen. The man looked agitated. He continued. That man, American explorer, he went inside temple. Now he branded with mark. Evil has him. Stay away from him. Do not keep him with you. We have seen it with him. The mark has him. The evil is in him. Please, leave this place now. Leave American. Run away. Determined to stick to my assignment, I told the man to leave my room. Yes, his words were marked with grave honesty, but I didn't care. I mostly considered him a nut, as these Mexicans usually are. I decided to sleep off his weird story, to be refreshed for the next day's journey. In the morning, my team packed up and left for the ruins right on schedule. We would have to trek through the jungle for a day and a half to get to the ruins, and then commence the digging the following day. As we moved through the dense tropical foliage, I had a chance to speak with this Cripp. In the back of my mind, the Mexican's words still sat. I had been mulling them over all morning. Now was my chance to actually see what the Mexican may have meant, why he was so spooked. So, Cripp, tell me more about these ruins you've found. I started the conversation off and studied the man's face as he began. Yet again, he seemed passionate about his find, as was evident in his words. His face held an almost enlightened expression as he spoke of the discoveries we would make. Well, Mr. Bandersnatch, I was just mapping out some of the terrain when I came on it. It was magnificent, the stone temple looming over me, just hiding the sun's light. It seemed to almost glow. The normally aggressive floor of the area seemed to surrender to the temple, as it was completely clear for about 50 yards all around the structure. Not a vine or tree penetrated the stone either, as was normally the case in these parts. I have to say it was glorious. The dark entrance just screamed discovery, so of course I went in. Then what? I pushed for some information. At this point I was equally excited for the dig. Suddenly his demeanor changed, only slightly though. An infinitesimal sense of confusion, almost irritation, was present on his face here. There was an almost unnoticeable twitch in his right eye as he continued, "That, my British friend, is the best part, but explaining it wouldn't do it any justice, so I'll just let you see when we get there. Anyway, I'd better move a little ahead. The jungle gets pretty tricky at this part of the journey. You men can follow behind a few steps." As Kripp walked ahead, one of my own men came to my side to replace him. A taller, burlier gentleman named Harold Ross studied Kripp as he walked away. The man was one of my diggers and a veteran of the trade who had been to numerous excavations in Africa. He was a trusted member of my team whom I held highly. The look on his face was a distrusting one. "Boss, I want to talk to you about something, if I may." "Why, yes, of course, Mr. Ross. What is it on your mind?" "It's just that I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the American. I'm not so sure of his story." "What are you getting at, old bean?" "I've seen a lot of weird things in this business, things no one should see. But this man is odd. I don't like him. Ever since I saw him, something about him seemed off, like he was hiding something. And when he wouldn't tell you just now about the inside of the temple, which I am sure any explorer would have relished in doing so, it just didn't seem right. Also, the villagers back there never said a word to him the whole time. They all avoided him. I'm telling you, boss, I don't think he checks out. I didn't want to unsettle any of my team. I would have hated to dislodge their focus on the assignment, so I neglected to mention the Mexican's warning. No doubt, Kripp did seem kind of odd, but I had no reason to be suspicious. However, I thought it a prudent fear, as many criminals have been known to stalk these kinds of ruins. They would hire dig teams like mine, only to have them dig up treasure, then in turn shoot the diggers dead and haul it off for their own gains. It was a legitimate concern for archaeologists like myself. To ease his mind, and the fraction of mine which was paranoid, I told him we should keep an eye on Kripp, and he agreed. We traveled the rest of the day through the jungle, and when night came we set up camp to rest. After dinner, we all retired to our tents and got ready to sleep. I was updating my logbook when I heard some voice talking at the camp. I thought everyone was asleep, so I left my tent to investigate. The voice was coming from Kripp's tent. I leaned in to get a better listen. It appeared as if he was talking to himself, but I couldn't make out any words or sentences in his speech, just obscure ranting. It was mortifying, listening to his hurried nonsense, capped by outbursts of chuckling and awful gargling sounds. The sound was positively unsettling. It touched the bottom of my gut and made my neck hairs stand. Just as I was about to open his tent to see if the fellow was all right, he fell silent, and I heard the sound of his head dropping on the pillow. Aghast at this incident, I crept back to my tent and attempted to get some sleep. In the morning we set out again. I was considerably less energetic than before, as I was unable to sleep well after listening to Kripp the night before. He looked worse as well, his eyes now lined with dark bags. He looked pale, worn out, quite the opposite of yesterday's Crip. The more I observed of this man, the more he puzzled me. The jungle became denser and denser as we moved closer to the temple. The aura of it changed as well. Unlike the day before, no animals were around. Gradually, the sounds of the jungle started to fade out until the area became completely silent. The only sounds were of everyone's steps and breathing. Everyone's except Crip's. His breathing was inaudible, and as couldn't discern his footsteps. It was perplexing. We trekked on through until my watch read noon, and shortly after, Crip stopped. He looked back at us, and with a grin revealing all of his teeth, he pulled back an elephant's ear leaf, revealing the temple. It was not as he described. The stone temple had an ominous look to it. The gray stone appeared to be untouched by the elements. The structure was plain, yet almost insinuating vanity. The feeling I had from looking upon it was confusing. I had never seen architecture like this. Then my eyes settled on the large image above the entrance. It was a symbol of some kind I had never seen before, utterly unknown and mysterious. It had a parading look about it, but just seeing it gave me deep chills. I didn't know what this place was, but I was starting to believe the Mexican's words about some evil. As the building practically poured out an alien energy, felt in the deepest reaches of my mind, I couldn't take my mind off the marking on the stone face until a member of my team fell to his knees. I watched him start crying and heaving, stupefied at what was happening to him. He heaved more violently now, and then he let out a mouthful of blood onto the ground. Terrified at his own blood before him, the man started shaking and looked up to me. Probably the jungle, noted Crip. There are a lot of sicknesses that can be contracted from the various insects and plants out here. Let's get him inside. I looked at Crip's face. I had a very dark quality to it now. This man was totally different. There was an insidious look about him. I turned to Ross, who was studying Crip as well. That look of distrust intensified. We dragged the coughing man into the dark temple entrance. Crip lit some torches, and, when coupled with a few of our lanterns, revealed the large chamber. I looked around at the walls, all bearing the same mark from outside. Corridors on all sides remained pitch black for now, to be explored later. I must admit the find was incredible. To have a structure as old as this, completely intact, was an oddity. It was the discovery of the century. The sick man was given some water and made to rest in the main chamber, and the rest of the team split up to start mapping the temple. Ross and I stayed together with Crip because I was the head, and because we wanted to have our eyes on him. We found passageways that led us underground, and the deeper we got, the more the temple appeared to have succumbed to nature. We came to a point where the way was blocked by earth, and so the digging began. The whole time I was in the temple, I kept hearing frightening sounds from the blackened corridors. The overwhelming sense of lurking darkness got to me after a while. It was like nothing I had felt before. The fear in my heart rose with every step, and a feeling of some terrifying discovery waiting for me kept re-entering my mind. I never knew my digs would be like this. I began to feel sick and agitated. My mind started wandering until I had completely lost focus. Suddenly I felt I had gotten lost and separated from the two others. I felt completely alone, that is, except for the creeping entity which lurched forward in the darkness towards me at every turn. My mind kept going back to that mark. I saw it over and over again, covered in ancient blood. I had a vision, a nightmare from the very depths of my mind. A sacrifice, blood all over the walls of the temple, that mark everywhere, people dead. Then the sounds came, a horrifying song in some foreign tongue, dancing to the beat of some drums, a great crescendo until the finale I felt was coming. That marked the whole time. I felt a slight slithering inside my bones. I wanted it to end. I reached for my eyes, gripped the eyeballs themselves. Realizing the ultimatum of my situation, I was then yanked from my state by Ross, who said I'd gone blank for a moment. I shrugged off the shivers, as those feeling completely resided. By then Crip was looking at me. I could see him in the corner of my eye, grinning a dark grin. A member of my team ran up to meet us, said that they had discovered something I should see. We followed him back to the main chamber and down an opposite hall which led underground, even deeper than the tunnels we were just in. At the bottom, the hall opened up to another dark room with a great circular door at the opposite end. The mark was carved with special attention to detail on this door, and I feared for what was inside. I looked back to see if Crip had discovered this as well, but he was gone. Ross looked surprised that he has lost Crip, having kept a close watch on the man. We studied the current room for a bit, then went back up to the main chamber, where a base had been set up, and found Crip there talking to a member of my team. He says a group of diggers hasn't come back yet, as they were supposed to. Crip looked grim as he spoke. I warned everyone to be careful around here. Someone could get lost easily in this place. A team was set to look for the diggers, with Crip leading them, and by nightfall there had still been no word. The rest of us decided to turn in for the night, and as we all sat around eating, I studied their faces. My men looked worried, frightened, and irritated. They all had a desperate nature to their tone of voice, and a resigned quality in their movements. They talked about odd feelings they'd been having since the dig started, swapping stories of creepy moments that concerned them. Not a one felt comfortable in the temple. They said they could feel it enveloping them, and if they didn't get far away soon, they would go missing as well. Their concern was genuine. I had felt the same thing since entering the temple. I noticed a great many of them scratch their eyes a lot. When I asked a few about it, they said that their eyes hurt from the darkness, and the markings on the wall seemed to exacerbate the problem. Greatly puzzled and afraid, I agreed that we needed to scrap the dig and leave as soon as we found the rest of the team. For now, we would try to get some sleep. I awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of terrible screams. When I came to, I realized I was tied up and being dragged along the ground through a familiar passageway. My thoughts scattered, and the screams continued from down the hall. I looked up at who was dragging me and found it to be one of my team. He was moaning. When I called to him, the man stopped walking and turned towards me. He continued his moans while he revealed his face. Blood ran down his cheeks like red tears. His eyes were shut. When I shakily asked what happened, he opened up his eyelids to reveal his sockets were empty. Blood poured from them down his face. I was terrified. It was a nightmare. I screamed for help, but he just turned around and kept onwards. When he reached his destination, he pulled me to my feet, allowing me to distinguish the room from before with the circular doorway, which had now been cleared away. I was led forward and into the bottom chamber, which gave me the single most gruesome, horrific sight I had ever and will ever encounter. The walls and floor were red with fresh blood, and mangled corpses littered the whole room. My entire team, even the missing men from before, all dead and mutilated, their bodies had been positioned in ways that resembled a twisted reenactment of an excavation. Their faces had all been ripped away, and their chests opened up, their hearts removed. I fell to my knees immediately and vomited. This could not have been a nightmare, it was way too real. That damn mark was everywhere, covered in blood as in my vision. I gaped at the overwhelming terror as I realized just what that mark really was. I was, as the Mexican had put it, true evil. Nothing in the world came close to its intensity of utter horror. I was paralyzed by the scene before me. There was a stone table in the middle of the room, on which rested a miserable Ross. He looked over and saw me. His eyes bulged out of his head, and he called out to me for help. But I was still tied up and paralyzed with fear. He was bound by his wrists and ankles, and was naked from the waist up. A figure appeared before him. It was Crip, covered in blood. He started laughing maniacally and turned his attention towards me. Cut him loose. The eyeless man who dragged me now cut the ropes, but for some reason I still could not move. I watched in horror as the eyeless man, now having no use left, was ordered to kill himself. He proceeded to take the knife he just used to cut my ropes and slit his own throat, gargling as his blood spilled out on the ground. He fell over dead. Welcome, Mr. Bandersnatch, to my crazy place. Crip cried out with a degree of lunacy. When I found this temple, I discovered an ancient evil more powerful than any god or devil. The markings on the wall are that of the mark of Canis. They have revealed themselves to individuals over time. This was a place of practice for those taken by the mark, as I am. I've been ordered to let myself go free, submit to my dark desires, and kill for the mark. I must obey its blessed commands. I was told to gather a team to open this chamber and kill them all. As you can see, I'm almost finished. Now I'm creating art. Care to watch? My feet moved instinctively closer to the table where Ross lay. Crip laughed uncontrollably. She took a knife and slowly gouged out an image of the mark onto Ross' stomach. I watched in disgust at his practice, and Ross screamed as the blood ran down his sides. Crip looked in ecstasy as he proceeded to make large craters in the squirming Ross cheeks. Now you shall see the mark with clear eyes, the very mark which haunts my own mind and drives me to this. Welcome it inside you. It loves you. Its loving insanity will be your lifeblood and your poison. The mark is, and always was, and it lives in us now. The madness became much deeper as he continued his dark art. He revealed a mass of eyeballs wrapped in a cloth, carefully placing them into the sockets he'd made in the dying Ross face. He reveled in his craftsmanship, having ran out of eyeballs with only 2 sockets left empty. He turned to me. Come now, Mr. Bandersnatch. Let us have those eyes of yours, and your sight will be joined with theirs. I could feel my hand reach for my eyes, as I had done earlier, and a grinning Crip extended his hand in anticipation. I fought hard, but the mark had insinuated itself into my mind, and I had little control. I fought it, and with my other hand reached for my pocket knife. Crip loved the idea. "Oh, nice choice. Just be careful not to damage them." He didn't realize my intention. I pulled out the knife and stabbed my other hand. The blood ran down my fingers. The pain kicked in, freeing me from the mark's hold. I turned and ran, Much to the surprise of a deeply insane Crip, I ran hard all the way out of the temple. The whole way I heard his incensed laughter and growls of intent, as I knew he was chasing after me, running for my life, the darkness closing in on me. I ran into the main chamber and right out of the temple into the night. I just kept running out into the jungle until I was stopped by a hand on my arm. Screaming, I lurched back, not realizing at first that it was the Mexican from the village, alongside several armed villagers. I looked back at the entrance to the temple and saw two figures in the dark corridor. Both had glowing eyes. One had multiple sets on his face. You see true evil in its form. The Mexican said, trained on the entrance, time to go. They will not follow us now. I stared as the two figures backed up into the darkness of the temple, never to be seen again. I could still hear the maddening laughter and screams. Mr. Bandersnatch's story is only one of many involving the mark and all its innate evil. Bandersnatch would return to England, where he would spend the rest of his days haunted by the memory of his trip. In June 1956, Bandersnatch would be found dead in his apartment. He had a knife in his hand, and he had gouged out both of his eyes. He must have figured it was the only way to rid himself of the visions he had of the mark of Canis.